Hey Sean, my name's Yatharth. Thanks for coming in. I'll be conducting the interview. How are you doing today?
Hi, Yatharth. It's nice to meet you. I'm doing pretty well, thanks.
Awesome. So, if you're ready, in the interest of time, I guess we could dive straight into the case if that's okay.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Awesome. So, our client is thinking about buying a piece of land in Jamaica for $3,000 and has asked us to determine whether or not this is a good idea.
All right. Sounds like a pretty interesting case. A couple questions for you right off the bat. How much land are they looking to acquire? Do they know that?
Yeah, so they're looking at land which is 10 acres in size.
10 acres. Okay. And do we know anything else about this client, like who they are and what purpose they would use the land for?
The client is a grad student just looking for an investment.
Okay. Interesting. And then do we know if what objectives they're trying to hit with this investment?
Yeah, so the client actually has a target of a $4,500 profit within the first 2 years, but that excludes the $3,000 purchase price. They don't really care about the purchase price.
Okay, great. So sounds like the client, who's an individual, is
Yep.
considering buying this land for an investment. I can think of a few different types of real estate investment. Do we know exactly what type of investment this would be?
Why don't we actually jump into a sort of a brainstorm to try to understand what could be some of the opportunities that they can use this land for?
Okay, sounds good. Do you mind giving me a minute?
Sure.
Okay, I think if the acquisition here is purely financial in nature, there's a few different types of investment I would consider. One would just be a buy and hold the land. Another one could be buy and look to develop property. This might be hard to do with just an individual, but it could potentially be a commercial or residential development that you would try to sell it and maybe get a higher profit margin than just land appreciation. The other thing would be turning it into farmland. Again, you would need more of an operation to do that, but then that could be a recurring source of revenue in theory year after year.
Yeah. So the client actually is interested in using the land for agriculture.
Okay, great. So then if the client is looking to use this land as an agricultural investment, do you mind giving me a couple minutes to set up a framework to think about whether or not that would be a good idea?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So there's three items of things I want to look at here. The first is the market. The second is the financial potential. You mentioned the goal the client has of making 4,500 over 2 years. And then the last thing are some other considerations, more qualitative. So starting with the market, I'd like to understand this overall market size and growth rate for the types of agricultural products that are available to grow on this land. Then I'd want to understand the competition that already exists and what share they have, and just to get a sense of like how competitive this market will be. If there's excess demand, potentially it's a lot more attractive. And then some other competitive dynamics I think relevant here. Just getting an understanding of the differentiation. These are agricultural products, so they may be relatively commoditized. That could potentially limit profitability down the road. And then also if there are any barriers to entry, not only for our purposes, we're investing in a foreign country, there could be regulatory hurdles, but again, ideally you want to find an investment in a market that has somewhat of a competitive moat to it. So then I would move on to some financial considerations. So the revenue and costs calculation to get to $4,500 over 2 years. On the revenue side, would want to understand from the products that we can sell or want to sell on this island, how much share do we think we can attain? So volume per year, and then what's the market price per year? Again, I'm assuming these products are relatively commoditized, so prices probably established. And then I would look at costs, fixed costs, variable costs. Fixed costs here, I think, would be the setup of land. So if we need to get the land, prepared to harvest it all, and if we need labor, so that could be variable labor. I'm assuming that would be pretty well correlated with output. And then any marketing costs, we would need to establish our brand in this area. Fixed costs could be salaried labor if we have someone kind of maintaining the farm year round. And any, I already mentioned setup costs. That would actually be a fixed cost, not a variable cost. So those are the things I would look at. And then other considerations would be the distribution. So would we have customers come to this land and buy products like on the side of the road, or would we sell it through a retailer? We'd need to consider regulatory concerns. So this is a foreign market that we're buying land in. What does that process look like? There could be risks to consider, like a tropical storm or a drought, things like that. And then lastly, you want to give some thought into how the competitors would respond. Like if the market is already saturated, it could potentially lower prices and then make it less attractive overall. So if it's all right with you, I would like to start with some information on the market. So do we have any information on the types of plants that are, available on this piece of land, and kind of like what the demand is like?
So we know that there are four main plants that can actually grow on this land, and the species essentially that let's categorize them as trees, shrubs, fruits, and exotic flowers. So essentially, these are the four kinds of plants that can grow on this land.
Okay.
And what was the next piece of information you wanted?
Yeah, if we had overall demand for these plants, that would be great.
Yep, so we do have that demand. So the demand per year in the overall market is 5,000 trees, 1,000 shrubs, 1,000 fruits, and 2,500 exotic flowers.
Okay, got it. So the next thing we would need that I'd want to consider is, are the competitors already meeting this demand, or is there excess demand?
Yeah, so we do understand the market situation and the market dynamics a little bit. So the competitors cannot meet the current demand. As of now, competitors have 60% of the tree market share, 20% of the shrub market share, 85% of the fruit market share, and 90% of the exotic flower market share. The remaining share can be captured by our client.
Okay. So what I want to do next is calculate the unmet demand. So I would take the inverse of the percentages that you just gave to get that. And so that would be, the competition is producing 60% of trees. So 40% is available times 5,000 would give 20,000 trees in unmet demand.
2,000.
2,000, yeah. That's what I meant if I said 5,000, sorry. And then shrubs, so the demand is 1,000, and the competition only covers 20%, so that leaves 800. Fruit with 1,000 and 15% unmet demand leads to 150. And then the exotic flowers would be 250 unmet demand.
Yep.
Okay.
About right.
So that's helpful. And the client wants to know specifically profitability over 2 years. Do we know anything about how this demand would grow in the next year?
We don't exactly know how the demand would grow. For this analysis, we can assume it'll stay constant.
Okay, got it. And then the other thing I would want to understand is what our capacity is. And so I believe you said earlier that we have 10 acres of land. So I would want to understand kind of how many different plants here could be planted on 1 acre of land.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into that, what do you think would sort of be the share if, like, we think about trees, shrubs, fruits? Like, which one do you think will take up the most space, for example?
Well, I think trees would take up the most space. I think fruit would take up the least amount of space. It grows on a vine, so it can grow vertically.
Yeah, so spot on. So
Yeah.
I can give you more numbers here. So we can
Okay.
grow 10 trees per acre. We can grow 25 shrubs per acre. That's 25. We can grow 75 fruit per acre and 50 exotic flowers per acre.
Got it. Okay. So what I want to do then is understand our total capacity and compare that to the market demand. So
Okay.
if we can grow 10 trees an acre and we have 10 acres, that's 100 trees that at most we could possibly grow. Shrubs would be 250, fruit would be 750, and flowers would be 500 if we did each of those things exclusively. And comparing that to the demand with, let's say, trees, the demand is 2,000 trees. So we could easily produce all of our acres could be trees if we wanted to. And the same goes with shrubs. So we could produce 250, but the demand is 800. It's a different story for fruit and flowers. In this case, we wouldn't produce as much as we could because the market demand isn't there. So that's just something to note. One thing that jumps out here is, and I'm going to do some quick math to verify this, but I'm going to assume that I'm going to see how many acres it would take to produce the maximum amount. So let's say like trees, for example, we'd produce 100 and that would take 10 acres. Shrubs would be 250 and that would be 10 acres. And then fruit, we would produce only 150. So that would take 2 acres. For flowers, we would only produce 250 and that would take 5 acres. So what we see here is that there's more demand that we could meet. We could potentially here own 27 acres of land to meet the rest of the market, and we don't have 27 acres of land, we have 10. So that tells me 2 things. One, we should prioritize this based on profitability per acre, since profitability is the key metric. And then the second thing is, and maybe we can look at this later if we have time, is maybe the client might want to consider buying more land to meet the rest of the demand on the island.
Yeah, sure. So for the sake of trying to understand whether this much land is sufficient, how would you like to approach the analysis?
Yeah, so like I said, I think the key metric is going to be unit profitability per acre. So if we have any information on trees, shrubs, fruits, and flowers, how much they sell for and how much they cost, and then maybe some if there's any labor costs or setup costs or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have some information on the amount that is like how they're priced in the market. So trees sell for $50 per tree. Shrubs would sell for $35 per shrub. Fruits would sell for $15 each, and exotic flowers would sell for $25 each.
Okay.
Now, before we jump into the cost, you sort of gave me an overview of the fixed cost and the variable cost. Which one would you like to tackle first?
Let's do variable costs so we can calculate the unit profit.
Absolutely. So then the variable cost per plant for trees is $30 per tree.
Okay.
Shrubs is $25 per shrub. Fruit is $11 per fruit. And exotic flowers are $17 per flower.
Okay, got it. So I'm going to take that information and calculate profitability per unit. So trees are worth 20, shrubs are worth 10, fruit $4, and flowers $8. And then we want to convert that into profit per acre. So using the information you gave before, we can plant 10 trees on 1 acre. So if each tree is worth 20 in profit, that would be 200 for trees, profit per acre. Shrubs, we can do 25 an acre, and the profit is 10, and so the profitability per acre is 250. For fruit, we can produce 75 at $4, so that is 300 in profits per acre. And then flowers is 50 times 8, so that is 400. Okay,
Right.
so this is my prioritization here. I would go the inverse of this list here. So starting with flowers because they're most profitable, and then fruit, and then shrubs, and then trees. And so
how does that influence our profit numbers overall if this is the approach we were to take?
yeah, so what I would want to do next is then calculate profitability each year. So taking these numbers, we would do, I'm just going to put some information on a new sheet here. So we established before that we meet the total demand for flowers with 5 acres, and that is the most profitable item. So we definitely want to sell 5 acres worth. So what I would do is just some math on profit per acre. Flowers is 400, and the number that we could use is 5 number of acres. So that's 5 acres. Now we have the next profitable thing is fruit at 300 per acre. And we know we would meet the market demand with 2 acres. So we would spend 2 acres of land on fruit, and then that leaves 3 acres left. And so I would allocate that towards shrubs because they're $50 more profitable per acre. So that would mean that trees are not going to be considered anymore. And I'm just going to do the math on annual revenue here, or sorry, annual unit profit.
Okay. Or operating profit. Yeah. Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So for flowers, it's 400 per acre. We have 5 acres. That's 2,000 in profit.
All right.
For fruit, it's going to be 2 acres times 300, so 600. And for shrubs, it's going to be 3 acres times 250, so 750. So adding these together, you would get $3,350 per year.
All right.
And this is just the operating profit. So at this point, we want to layer in fixed costs too. Do we have any information on fixed costs?
Yeah, so you mentioned a few different fixed costs around like the setup, the labor, any sort of marketing we have to do. Yeah, so our fixed cost would be $500 for the initial setup, and that's just a one-time cost. And then we have another cost of $350 per year for salaried labor. So those are the 2 key costs to consider here.
Okay. So in year 1, we have a $500 setup cost, $350 in labor, for total costs of $850. So, and then our operating profit was $3,350. So if you subtract the fixed cost, you get $2,500 in total profit. For year 2, since we're assuming flat demand, and can I also assume the prices are going to remain flat?
Yeah, you can. That's a fair assumption.
So that means that the operating profit is going to be the same at $3,350, but the costs are only going to be labor of $350. So that's $3,000 in profit year 2 and $2,500 in year 1. So in total, expected profit is $5,500, which is 1,000 or about 20% higher than what the client is looking for. So for now, I think this seems like a pretty good investment.
Awesome. So now that we know that the financial side is working out pretty well for our client, you did have some other areas to look at. So would you just mind giving me a sort of a download of what might be some other factors to consider?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned earlier, we figured out that there's still going to be unmet demand. So you want to consider potentially getting additional funding to buy the rest of the land. If not, another competitor will come in, or an existing competitor, and could get an advantage over time due to better unit economics there, economies of scale. So I think we want to consider that. I think we want to understand, like, how difficult will it be to make this purchase from a regulatory perspective?
Right.
So what is the extent of bureaucracy, or how long could that take potentially? We definitely want to think about go to market to sell these plants. So like, is that, going to be on the side of the road? Are we going to ship them to people? Are we going to have, a storefront, or is someone just going to go walk through the land and pick out the fruit that they want? And, but we need to figure that out. And then I would say marketing to get awareness. This is a totally new competitor in this industry that's already established. So we need to drive people to our farm.
No, absolutely. I think those are very reasonable concerns. My last question to you before we actually walk into the meeting with the client is going to be, if there was demand in the market for exotic flowers, like more than what we see right now, would you suggest using all 10 acres for exotic flowers?
So, yeah, that's an interesting question. So exotic flowers are our most profitable item at $400 per acre. So that would potentially be $4,000 in profit and operating profit per year from 3,350. So that's a 25% increase. I mean, around there, that's pretty considerable. I think ultimately what I would say is, with this current plan, we're already overachieving the profitability target. And if we produce just one type of plant, it becomes a lot riskier. So, there could be a drought or a disease that affects one of these types of plants. And we're right now diversified, having 4 of them. So even though the expected return would be higher with just shrubs, the risk is also much, much higher too.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. The concentration risk might be pretty huge. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would say without any, I think we would need some data maybe on kind of like the overall shrub production each year and how much that varies. So you could look at standard deviation and you could try to get to like a risk adjusted return. But without absent that data for now, I would say it's better just to be diversified since we're already over delivering the target.
Awesome. No, that makes sense. So now if we were to present our analysis to the client, what would you tell them?
Great. Can I have a minute to think this through?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Great. Okay. So my recommendation to the client would be to proceed with this investment. And the reason is because according to the calculations here, it's going to attain $5,500 in profitability over 2 years, which is 1,000 or about a little over than 20% of the target. So it's a pretty good investment. The risks that I would think about next are, currently, we have no awareness of this business in the island among the customers. So we need to develop a go-to-market strategy and a pretty extensive marketing campaign. The other thing that we uncovered is there's still excess demand in the market. So it's worth considering if we can get additional funding to buy more land, assuming that we don't have better investment opportunities elsewhere. The last thing that I would consider is the risk of demand growth going forward. So right now we're only looking at 2 years and we're assuming a flat demand. So the risk is somewhat mitigated, but you'd want to consider maybe, a multi-year investment here. You'd probably want to look out 5 years or so, assess the growth rate and also the risk of a tropical storm or a drought, or how likely are those things to happen, because that could obviously really hurt profitability.
I think that's a pretty clear analysis, Sean. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to working with you again. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Yatharth. Good to meet you.
Cheers. Bye.